The ocean winds howled across the decks of the USS Horizon like a beast trying to tear the aircraft carrier apart at its seams. Even at 0600, the storm had already built waves that crashed against the hull, sending spray 30 feet into the air and turning the flight deck into a treacherous sheet of water and foam. This was no place for the faint of heart, and Lieutenant Commander Maya Chen knew it better than most. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Maya walked across the heaving deck with the kind of balance that came from years at sea. No visible insignia marked her as different from the dozens of sailors securing aircraft and equipment against the worsening storm. Just well-worn boots that had seen real action, utility pants that fit like they'd been through war, and a simple ponytail that revealed the weather-beaten lines around her eyes where squinting against sea spray had left its mark. Everything about her seemed understated, ordinary even, except for the way she moved. There was something deliberate about her stride, economical and precise, like someone who'd learned that wasted motion could be the difference between life and death when the sea decided to claim what it wanted. The deck officer barely looked up from his clipboard, just waved her through with the bored efficiency of someone counting down the minutes until shift change. Maya nodded once and kept walking, her small duffel bag slung over one shoulder, transfer orders folded neatly in her breast pocket. She'd been awake since 0400, sitting on the edge of her rack on the transport vessel that had brought her to the carrier group, listening to the storm build and wondering if today would be the day she finally got to prove herself again. The Horizon wasn't just any carrier. It was the flagship of the Pacific Fleet's Rapid Response Force, home to the most elite naval aviators and the most advanced aircraft in the arsenal. It was also the last place anyone expected to find Lieutenant Commander Maya Chen, whose name had become synonymous with unfit for command in certain naval circles. Maya had spent the last 18 months assigned to a desk at Naval Station Pearl Harbor, analyzing weather patterns and writing reports that nobody read. The kind of assignment they gave to officers they wanted to forget about without the messes of a formal discharge. The kind of professional exile that was supposed to encourage early retirement. Her gear bag had sat open on her bunk that morning. Contents organized with the kind of military precision that became second nature after enough years of service. Clean clothes folded tight, toiletries in a clear bag, and at the bottom, wrapped in a faded bandana, a photograph she hadn't looked at in 6 months. She pulled it out that morning, held it up to the dim light filtering through the porthole, and made herself remember. 4 figures on the flight deck of her previous posting, the USS Intrepid. Blue skies in the background. Her in the middle. Flight helmet tucked under her arm, flanked by her navigation officer and 2 junior lieutenants. All of them squinting against the sun. All of them young enough to think they were invincible. The navigation officer had made it to commander. Got a shore posting in San Diego. According to his occasional emails, he coached his daughter's soccer team now and had never been happier. 1 lieutenant was still serving, transferred to a destroyer in the Atlantic Fleet. The other never made it home. A catastrophic engine failure during night operations had taken his life during Maya's first command as air boss. His daughter was starting at Annapolis next month. Had her father's eyes and her father's determination, and absolutely no idea that Lieutenant Commander Maya Chen existed. Maya had promised herself she'd take one last deployment before the girls' plebe summer began. Not for glory, not for some kind of closure that therapists talked about, but just to prove to herself that she could still face the storm without falling apart. Inside the carrier's Combat Direction Center, the air conditioning fought a losing battle against the heat generated by dozens of radar screens and computer systems. 2 watch officers lounged at their stations, one wearing a baseball cap backward like it was still his fraternity days. the other clutching an energy drink like it contained the secrets of the universe. They were laughing about something on a tablet screen. Probably a video of some junior officer messing up in spectacular fashion. The kind of humor that develops when you spend your days watching people try to do something that most of them aren't cut out for. Help you? The baseball cap guy looked up, his tone carrying that particular brand of boredom that said he'd already decided she didn't belong there before she'd even opened her mouth. Maya stopped in front of their console, her posture straight but not rigid. "Lieutenant Commander Maya Chen, I'm reporting as the new Deputy Air Operations Officer. My orders were transmitted yesterday." She pulled out the paperwork, unfolded it once, and placed it flat on the console. "Assignment effective 0700 today." Energy drink guy looked her over like she was a curiosity at a county fair. His eyes taking in her lack of carrier-specific patches. The way she stood there waiting patiently for them to do their jobs. "You want a what now?" he asked, voice dripping with disdain. "Join the Air Ops team," she repeated, her voice level as a horizon. "On a calm day. I've been assigned to assist with storm contingency planning given the approaching typhoon." The two officers exchanged glances, and Maya caught the look that passed between them. It was the same look she'd seen 1,000 times before in a dozen different contexts from people who thought they knew what she was capable of based on what they could see on the surface. Baseball cap guy picked up her paperwork and scanned it with the theatrical attention of someone reading the fine print on a car warranty, then dropped it back on the console like it was contaminated. "Yeah, I see," he drawled, leaning back in his chair with the kind of casual arrogance that came from holding a little bit of power over someone else's day. "We're running critical operations right now. Air Boss doesn't have time to babysit new transfers. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The authorization is signed by your carrier group commander," Maya said quietly, not moving from her position in front of the console. "Don't care if it's signed by Sinkpack himself," energy drink guy chimed in, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been doing this job for all of 8 months and thought that made him an expert. "Air Ops isn't a rehabilitation center. Lives depend on what happens in this room." Maya didn't argue, didn't raise her voice, didn't even flinch. She just picked up her paperwork, folded it once, and stepped back toward a metal chair positioned near the bulkhead where she could see the main tactical display stretching across the wall. "You can wait all you want," baseball cap guy called after her, his voice carrying that particular smugness that comes from winning a battle you didn't even know you were fighting. "Answer is still going to be no when the air boss gets here." She sat down, placed her bag at her feet, and folded her hands in her lap. From where she sat, she could see the weather radar display showing the approaching typhoon, its spiral arms stretching across hundreds of miles of open ocean, moving steadily toward the carrier group's position. The two officers went back to their tablet, shaking their heads and chuckling about the officer who thought she could just walk in and join the elite air operations team on the Navy's flagship carrier. "Some people wash out once and think they deserve a second chance," one of them muttered loud enough for her to hear. Maya closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her. The distant rumble of aircraft being moved in the hangars below. The ping of radar returns, the hum of computer cooling fans. Sounds that had been the soundtrack to half her adult life. Sounds that still lived in her dreams. Both the good ones and the ones that woke her up sweating in quarters that smelled like industrial, cleaner and recycled air. The minutes ticked by slowly in the humming electronic heart of the carrier. Every so often, one of the officers would glance her way and shake his head like she was a problem that would eventually solve itself if they just ignored her long enough. Maya sat perfectly still, her breathing controlled and economical. Her Patience, the kind that came from learning to wait in places where moving at the wrong time could get people killed. A young petty officer walked past, communications headset slung around her neck, tablet computer in hand. She looked at Maya with curious eyes, taking in the stillness. The way someone could sit in the controlled chaos of the combat direction center without fidgeting or checking a phone every 30 seconds. "Ma'am," the petty officer said, slowing down. "You okay over here?" Maya opened her eyes and nodded. "Once, just waiting." The young sailor nodded and kept walking, but she looked back twice before disappearing into the communications suite. Something about the way Maya sat there, perfectly still in the middle of constant motion, reminded her of her grandmother. Old Navy nurses had that same quality. They could wait forever if they had to, and they never seemed to doubt that their patience would eventually be rewarded. Inside the Combat Direction Center, computer systems hummed their electronic symphony, and Maya Chen continued to wait. She'd made a promise to someone who couldn't see it fulfilled anymore, and she intended to see it through, no matter how long it took, or how many people thought she didn't belong there. The typhoon on the radar display continued its inexorable approach, waiting too. Inside the main operations room, the morning watch team was getting their second wind after the initial round of status reports. The air conditioning hummed overhead, fighting the heat generated by dozens of electronic systems that filled every available rack space. Swivel chairs were arranged in precise rows facing the main tactical displays, showing the carrier groups, position, the approaching storm system, and the status of every aircraft in the air wing. The same two officers who had turned Maya away were holding court near the coffee station, regaling anyone who would listen with their tale of the washout still sitting outside in the corridor. "I'm telling you, she's been out there for over an hour," energy drink guy was saying, gesturing with his hands like he was describing a fish that got away. "Just sitting there staring at the tactical display like she's trying to will herself into the command structure." A cluster of junior officers laughed. These were the new ones, fresh from their initial deployments, still young enough to think. Everything was either hilarious or terrifying with no middle ground. Their qualification pins were so new they still had the manufacturer's shine, and their confidence was the kind that came from not yet knowing how much they didn't know. "What's her deal?" asked one, a kid with a Texas drawl and enough self-assurance. "For 3 people. Says she wants to join Air Ops," baseball cap replied, shaking his head with the weary patience of someone explaining something obvious to a child. "Got some paperwork that says she's qualified, but come on. Look at her. No carrier patch, no air wing insignia. Probably pushed papers at Pearl Harbor and thinks that counts as operational experience." More laughter rippled through the group. The kind that comes easy when you're 28 and convinced you know everything there is to know about naval aviation. "Did you see her hands, though?" The female petty officer from earlier had walked in, tablet still in her grip, her voice cutting through the chatter with the kind of observation that comes from actually paying attention. "They're scarred up pretty good. Don't get hands like that from pushing papers. Probably worked in engine maintenance," someone suggested with a dismissive wave. "Or maybe she does rock climbing," another added as if that explained everything. "Yeah, well, rock climbing doesn't make you qualified to help run air operations on a carrier during typhoon season," baseball cap declared with the authority of someone who'd been doing this job for all of 2 years and thought that made him an expert on everything aviation related. The conversation continued to flow around the room, each comment adding another layer to the story they were building about the woman outside. She was a has-been, a burnout, someone who'd made one critical mistake and couldn't accept that her career was over. The kind of person who thought naval service was about second chances instead of the unforgiving reality that one error in judgment could end everything. Nobody noticed the woman who had entered through the rear hatch of the operations room. She moved with the kind of quiet authority that didn't need to announce itself. The way senior officers learn to walk after enough years of being the person everyone looked to when things went sideways. Captain Eleanor Reeves was 52 years old and had been sailing on Navy vessels since before some of these officers were born. She'd commanded destroyers in 2 different conflicts, navigated everything from coastal patrol boats to guided missile cruisers through conditions that would make most sailors queasy just thinking about them. Her uniform was pressed but not pristine, worn enough to show it got used regularly. Her face carried the weathered look of someone who'd spent serious time in serious places, and her eyes held the kind of depth that came from making decisions that other people never had to think about. She'd come to the Combat Direction Center for a routine briefing, the kind of check-in that kept the information flowing and the chain of command intact. But what she was hearing in this operations room wasn't routine at all. I'm just saying. One of the junior officers was pontificating, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd never been tested by anything more challenging than a qualification exam. If you can't handle the pressure the first time, you shouldn't get a second shot. Too many lives at stake. Captain Reeves stopped walking, turned toward the voices and listened. She's probably just trying to pad her service record before retirement, another officer added, his words drawing appreciative chuckles from his peers. Wants to tell her civilian friends she served on the Horizon. Or maybe she's writing a memoir, energy drink guy suggested, his voice dripping with disdain. How I Almost Made It, a cautionary tale. Could sell dozens of copies. The laughter that followed had an edge to it now, the kind that turned from amusement to meanness without anyone noticing the transition. Reeves had heard enough. She'd spent enough years in the Navy to recognize the sound of people who thought they knew everything about someone they'd never bothered to actually see. She turned and walked back outside, leaving the operations room to its jokes and assumptions. She had a feeling those jokes were about to age very poorly. The controlled climate of the carrier's interior still carried the faint smell of machinery, jet fuel, and too many people working in too little space. Even after all these years on naval vessels, the unique bouquet of a carrier at sea still reminded you that this was a place where nature was held at bay only through constant vigilance and engineering. She pulled her cap down low and started walking toward the corridor outside the Combat Direction Center, her boots making the distinctive sound of someone who knew exactly where they were going and why. That's when she saw her. She was exactly where the officers had said she'd be, sitting in a metal chair near the bulkhead. But seeing her in person, Reeves understood immediately why the kids inside had gotten it so wrong. They were looking at her lack of patches, her transfer status, her apparent demotion. They weren't looking at her. She sat with perfect stillness. Back straight but not rigid, hands folded but ready to move. Her breathing was controlled, economical. She wasn't fidgeting with electronics or showing any sign of the restless energy that defined most people her age. She was a study in control and patience, the kind you learned in places where moving at the wrong time could get people killed. As she got closer, the woman turned her head slightly, acknowledging her approach without breaking her composure. That's when she saw it. Behind her right ear, where her pulled-back hair revealed the line of her neck, was a scar, small, jagged, with the distinctive pattern of emergency sutures done in field conditions. Reeves's breath caught in her throat. She knew exactly what kind of injury left a mark like that. Not a training accident or a slip on a wet deck. That was the kind of scar you got when something exploded nearby and sent shrapnel flying in all directions. The kind of injury sustained when everything went wrong all at once and people started dying. The scar was faded with age, barely visible, unless you knew what to look for. But below it, just visible at the collar of her uniform, was another mark. A thin line of raised tissue that disappeared beneath her clothing. Reeves had seen that kind of scarring exactly twice in her career. Once on a sailor who'd survived when an aircraft broke loose during heavy seas and crushed him against a bulkhead. Once in a classified briefing about operations that officially never happened. The woman sitting in front of her wasn't some burnout looking for a second chance. She was a survivor from one of the worst carrier incidents in recent naval history. The kind of officer whose experience was literally bought with blood, and whose existence was an inconvenient reminder of mistakes the Navy would rather forget. Everything about the morning suddenly made perfect, terrible sense. "Commander," Reeves said quietly, her voice carrying the respect that came from recognizing someone who'd operated in places most people couldn't even imagine. Maya looked up at her with dark eyes that held depths she couldn't read. There was something in her gaze that reminded her of deep water. Calm on the surface with currents running underneath that could pull you down if you weren't careful. "Captain," she replied, her voice neutral but not dismissive. She'd clearly made her as the carrier's commanding officer from 50 feet away, probably from the way she walked more than anything else. "I couldn't help but notice your scars." She kept her voice low, conversational. "That's some very specific damage." She didn't flinch, didn't try to cover it up, didn't deflect with humor or false modesty. Most people would have made some joke about clumsiness or blamed it on a childhood accident. Maya just looked at her with those steady dark eyes and said nothing. "It is," she finally replied, offering neither explanation nor apology. "Mind if I ask where you got it?" Reeves asked. Maya studied her face for a long moment, reading things in her posture and bearing that the young officers had completely missed. She was cataloging details, the way she held herself, the particular shade of weathering around her eyes, the unconscious authority in her stance. All the little tells that separated people who'd seen real disasters from people who'd only heard stories about them. Then she spoke two words that confirmed everything Reeves suspected and feared. USS Valiant. The USS Valiant. The carrier, where a cascading series of failures during night operations in heavy seas had led to the loss of 3 aircraft and 7 personnel. Where an air boss had made a fateful call to continue flight operations despite deteriorating conditions. Where a junior officer named Maya Chen had tried to stop the disaster before it happened and been ignored until it was too late. Reeves felt something shift in her chest. A combination of respect, recognition, and the sudden understanding that she was looking at a ghost she'd assumed was pushed out of the service entirely. "What was your call sign?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "Cassandra." The name hit her like a physical blow. Cassandra. The officer who'd predicted the disaster on the Valiant, who'd tried to warn her superiors about the dangerous combination of factors that were aligning against them, who disappeared from all active duty rosters after a disciplinary review that found her insubordinate and unfit for command, despite being proven catastrophically right. Standing in front of her, waiting quietly in the corridor of the Navy's flagship carrier, was the woman who'd tried to prevent one of the worst operational disasters in recent naval history, and her officers had been laughing at her for over an hour. The weight of that realization settled on Reeves's shoulders like a lead blanket. She thought about the jokes in the operations room, the casual dismissal, the complete failure to recognize that they were in the presence of someone whose experience had literally been written in blood and whose warnings had gone unheeded at terrible cost. "Jesus," she said quietly, then caught herself. "I'm sorry, Commander, your reputation precedes you." "Most people don't recognize the scars," Maya replied, her voice carrying the kind of exhaustion that came from years of being invisible in plain sight. "Most people don't need to." Reeves looked back toward the Combat Direction Center where her paperwork had been dismissed, then toward the operations room where the jokes were probably still flying. Her jaw tightened as she thought about the casual arrogance she'd witnessed. The complete lack of respect for someone who'd earned the right to be treated as more than a punchline. "Commander," she said, her voice carrying the authority of 25 years in uniform, "you'll serve today." Something shifted in Maya's posture at those words. Not relief exactly, but a subtle change from patience to readiness. She'd been prepared to wait all day if necessary, But she'd also been prepared for this moment, when someone finally saw her for who she was rather than who they assumed she was. "Thank you, Captain," she said simply. Reeves turned and walked back toward the operations room, her stride sharp and purposeful. Behind her, Maya remained seated, but something in her bearing had changed. The waiting was over. Inside the operations room, the laughter died the moment Reeves walked through the door. Her expression was dark enough to still the air, and everyone in the room suddenly found their displays or their notebooks very interesting. "Which one of you turned away the officer outside?" Her voice carried the kind of quiet authority that made people's spines straighten involuntarily. Baseball Cap raised his hand like a student confessing to a minor infraction. "That was me, ma'am, but she's not on the air operations roster, and we're in the middle of storm preparations." "Did you look at her paperwork?" "Yes, ma'am." "But did you look at her?" The officer's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "The woman sitting outside," Reeves continued, her voice deadly quiet, "has more experience with carrier air operations in extreme weather than everyone in this room combined. She survived disasters that would have broken most of you, and she tried to prevent failures that people in this very room are still making." The room had gone completely silent. Even the cooling fan seemed to have stopped humming. "But more importantly," Reeves continued, her eyes sweeping the room like searchlights, "she has something most of you will never earn. The courage to speak truth when no one wants to hear it." She turned to the air operations officer, a commander who'd been watching the exchange with growing alarm. "Get her integrated into the team immediately. Full access to all systems, full voice in all decisions, full respect from all personnel." "Yes, ma'am." "But the qualification requirements." "She's qualified." Reeves's stare could have cut steel. "Lieutenant Commander Chen survived the Valiant incident. Her qualification was written in the blood of people who didn't listen to her warnings." Energy drink guy found his voice. "The Valiant?" "But she said exactly what she needed to say," Reeves interrupted, her tone suggesting that further questions would not be welcome. "You assumed the rest." She walked to the hatch, then paused and looked back. "Oh, and gentlemen, the next time an officer with Commander Chen's experience asks to join your team, the correct response is, 'Yes, ma'am, right away, ma'am.' Are we clear?" A chorus of "Yes, ma'am" followed her out the hatch. Behind her, the operations room erupted in whispered conversations and frantic database searches. The Valiant incident, Cassandra, Typhoon operations. The pieces were starting to come together, and nobody was laughing anymore. The female petty officer who'd spoken up earlier sat quietly at her station, her tablet forgotten in her hands. She'd known there was something different about the woman outside. Something that didn't fit the easy assumptions her colleagues had made. Now she understood what it was. Experience. The kind that was earned in places where the margin for error was measured in seconds, and the stakes were higher than most people could imagine. Outside, Captain Reeves walked directly to where Maya was still sitting. She looked up as the captain approached, and Reeves saw something different in her eyes now. Not anticipation exactly, but a subtle shift from patience to readiness, like a weapon being taken off safety. "Air Ops is yours," she said simply. "Full integration. Full voice." Maya stood, shouldered her bag, and nodded once. "Thank you, Captain." As they walked toward the Combat Direction Center, Reeves found herself matching her pace. There was something humbling about walking beside someone whose reputation existed only in classified incident reports and whispered conversations in officers' quarters. Someone who'd seen disaster unfold in slow motion and lived to carry the weight of it, then disappeared into the kind of professional exile that most officers would consider a career death sentence. "Can I ask you something?" she said as they approached the CDC hatch. "Maya's fine." "Maya, why here? Why now? You could have requested assignment to any number of vessels with less scrutiny and less history." She was quiet for so long Reeves thought she wasn't going to answer. Then, so softly she almost missed it, made a promise to someone who can't keep it himself anymore. Reeves nodded, understanding completely. In their line of work, the ghosts accumulated. You carried them with you wherever you went, and sometimes keeping faith with the dead was the only thing that kept you moving forward. They reached the Combat Direction Center, and Reeves pulled open the heavy hatch. The controlled atmosphere of the CDC rushed out, a cocktail of electronics, coffee, and tension. Inside, the operations center hummed with activity. Every screen, every display, every workstation had been configured for typhoon operations with the kind of precision that made the difference between weathering the storm and becoming part of it. A small crowd had already gathered. Word traveled fast on a carrier, especially word about officers with haunted pasts walking among them. The female petty officer from earlier stood near a communications console, her eyes wide with something approaching respect. A handful of junior officers had found excuses to be in the area, their earlier jokes forgotten in the face of dawning realization. Maya walked directly to the air operations station without acknowledging the audience. She did a quick visual assessment of the displays, checking systems with the automatic efficiency of someone who'd done this thousands of times before. Her movements were economical, professional, with no wasted motion or unnecessary drama. She sat down at the auxiliary station and began reviewing the current disposition of the air wing. Her hands moved across the console with muscle memory. Precision, bringing up displays and adjusting parameters without conscious thought. The screens came alive, showing the familiar pattern of a carrier air wing battening down for heavy weather. But Reeves noticed something the others didn't. Maya wasn't just looking at the current status. She was running through contingency scenarios, her fingers dancing across the keyboard as she modeled different outcomes based on subtle shifts in the storm's path, the carrier's heading, and the positioning of the escort vessels. She was seeing patterns that others missed, connections between seemingly unrelated factors that could compound into disaster if left unchecked. "Sir," she said quietly to the air operations officer who had materialized at her side, "the recovery sequence needs adjustment. We're bringing them in too tight with this sea state." Commander Jackson, the air boss, bristled visibly. "The sequence is standard procedure assumes standard conditions." Maya interrupted, her voice calm but firm. "The combination of wind shear at 200 feet, the carriers, pitch in these seas, and the fuel state of the returning aircraft creates a compounding risk factor." On the screen, she pulled up 3 different displays side by side. The carrier's motion through the growing swells, the wind patterns at various altitudes, and the fuel consumption rates of the aircraft currently aloft. "If we maintain this recovery interval, we're asking pilots to stack in turbulence with decreasing fuel margins while we pitch 5 degrees bow up every 70 seconds. We need to extend the interval by 45 seconds per aircraft." Jackson started to object, then stopped as he studied the displays. Maya wasn't speculating or theorizing. The data was right there, clear as day for anyone who knew how to read it. The risk factors were aligning in exactly the way she described, creating a scenario where one small mistake could cascade into something much worse. That would put the last aircraft dangerously close to bingo fuel, he said finally. "Better to divert the last 2 to Okinawa than risk losing them trying to recover in these conditions," Maya replied. "The storm is intensifying faster than forecast. We need margins, not miracles." The operations room had fallen completely silent except for the hum of electronics and the distant sound of the carrier pushing through increasingly heavy seas. Even the officers who'd been joking about her earlier were watching with focused attention as Maya methodically dismantled the recovery plan and rebuilt it, with the kind of precision that came from having seen disaster up close. In the command chair, Captain Reeves observed without comment. This was exactly why she'd wanted Chen on her ship. Not because of her technical skills, though those were evident, but because of her willingness to challenge assumptions before they became disasters. On a carrier at sea, groupthink killed as surely as any storm. Commander Jackson studied the displays for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Make the adjustments. Divert Raptors 5 and 6 to Okinawa. Extend the recovery. Interval to 3 minutes. Maya's fingers flew across the keyboard, implementing the changes with quiet efficiency. Nothing in her demeanor suggested triumph or satisfaction. This wasn't about being right. It was about keeping people alive. The next 4 hours passed in a blur of focused activity as the carrier group prepared for the approaching typhoon. Maya moved through it all with the kind of calm competence that made the impossible look routine. When communications with 2 of the escort vessels became intermittent due to atmospheric interference, she anticipated the problem and had already prepared alternate coordination protocols. When fuel calculations for the diverted aircraft showed them cutting it too close for comfort, she worked with the air boss to arrange mid-air refueling from a tanker operating out of Kadena Air Base. Each challenge was met with the same methodical approach. Identify the problem, assess the risk factors, implement solutions with appropriate margins for error. There was no drama, no raised voices, no heroics. Just the quiet professionalism of someone who understood that, in naval aviation, excellence wasn't measured in moments of individual brilliance, but in disasters that never happened because someone saw them coming. As the morning wore on, the carrier's motion through the water became increasingly violent. The typhoon was now less than 200 miles away, its outer bands already lashing the carrier group with wind gusts approaching 50 knots and seas building to 20 feet. Inside the Combat Direction Center, equipment had been secured, loose items stowed, and everyone was either strapped into their seats or braced against fixed structures. Last aircraft recovered, the LSO's voice reported through the speakers. Flight deck secure. A ripple of relief passed through the CDC, getting all aircraft either launched to safe harbors or recovered and secured before the worst of the storm hit had been the primary concern. Now they could focus on navigating the typhoon itself. Maya was reviewing the latest weather data when a new alert flashed on her screen. She frowned, fingers tapping rapidly to bring up additional information. "Sir," she called to the air boss, "we have an issue." Commander Jackson made his way across the rolling deck to her station. "What kind of issue?" "Medical emergency on the Roosevelt," she said, referring to one of the escort destroyers. "Sailor with severe appendicitis. They're requesting immediate medevac." Jackson's face hardened. "Negative. All aircraft secured. Sea state exceeding safety parameters for helo operations." Maya was already pulling up more data. "The sailor's condition is critical. Sepsis likely within 2 hours. Roosevelt doesn't have surgical capabilities. And we don't have flying weather," Jackson replied firmly. "We can't risk a helicopter and crew for one sailor. Not in these conditions." Maya's face remained impassive, but something flickered in her eyes. Not anger or frustration, but the calculating look of someone running probabilities in her head. "There's a window," she said quietly, pulling up a detailed weather display. "The storm bands are moving in sequence. We have a 30-minute gap between the current band and the next one. Enough time for a fast extraction if we launch immediately." "Negative," Jackson repeated. "Conditions are well outside safety parameters." "Parameters assume average pilot skill," Maya said, her voice still calm but with an edge of steel beneath it. "We have better than average available." The air boss leaned in, lowering his voice. "Commander Chen, I understand your concern for the sailor, but I'm not risking additional lives on a rescue attempt that has a high probability of failure." Maya looked up at him, her dark eyes steady. "With respect, sir, that assessment assumes you don't have the right pilot. And I suppose you think you're the right pilot?" There was a challenge in his voice, but also curiosity. "I know I am," she replied without hesitation or bravado. Simple statement of fact. Before Jackson could respond, a new voice cut through. The tension. "What's the extraction plan, Commander Chen?" Captain Reeves had approached without either of them noticing, her focus entirely on the tactical problem at hand. Maya didn't miss a beat. MH-60 with minimal crew. Launch now, fly below the storm band at 100 feet, extract the patient, and return before the next band hits. Total mission time: 28 minutes if executed precisely. The risk factors? Reeves asked, her voice neutral. "Hi," Maya admitted. Wind shear near the water, deck motion on both vessels. Visibility degraded, but manageable with the right approach. And if conditions worsen while you're airborne, divert to the Roosevelt, secure the aircraft, and ride out the storm with them. Reeves studied the weather displays for a long moment, then looked directly at Maya. "You've flown medevac and worse." It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am." "This isn't about redemption, Commander," Reeves said quietly. "No, ma'am. It's about doing the job we signed up for." Something passed between the two women in that moment. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a shared value that transcended regulations and safety parameters. The fundamental belief that sometimes you had to accept risk to yourself to eliminate risk to others. Reeves turned to the air boss. "Prepare the MH-60 for immediate launch. Minimal crew, maximum medical package." "Captain," Jackson began, "the conditions are challenging but not impossible," Reeves finished for him. "And we have a sailor dying on one of our escorts. Make it happen." "Yes, ma'am." Jackson moved away, already issuing orders through his headset. Reeves turned back to Maya. "You have 28 minutes from wheels up to wheels down, Commander. Not a second more." "Understood, Captain." As Maya stood to leave, Reeves added quietly, "The Valiant wasn't your fault, Maya, but what you do today is your responsibility. Bring everyone home." Maya nodded once, her expression unchanged but her eyes showing something that might have been gratitude. Then she was moving, heading for the hatch with the purposeful stride of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done and how to do it. Behind her, the Combat Direction Center erupted in controlled chaos as personnel shifted to support the emergency operation. Reeves watched her go, then turned to the tactical display showing the approaching storm bands. The window was real but narrow. Success would require perfect execution under nearly impossible conditions. Exactly the kind of situation where officers like Maya Chen either vindicated themselves or proved their critics right. 20 minutes later, Maya stood on the heaving flight deck, the wind tearing at her flight suit and the spray stinging her face like tiny needles. The MH-60 Seahawk helicopter sat before her, rotors already turning, its crew of 3 pilot, co-pilot, and rescue swimmer medic strapped in and ready. The deck rolled beneath her feet as the carrier fought its way through seas that were now approaching 25 feet. Around her, the flight deck crew worked with practiced precision to prepare for launch, their movements hampered by the weather gear they wore and the violent motion of the ship. Everyone knew this was a mission operating well outside normal safety parameters. Everyone also knew why they were doing it. Maya completed her pre-flight walk-around, checking every accessible system one final time despite the punishing conditions. When she was satisfied, she climbed into the pilot's seat and strapped in, running through the final checklist with mechanical efficiency. CDC, Seahawk Rescue, pre-launch check complete. Request immediate clearance. Her voice was steady in the intercom, betraying none of the adrenaline that must have been coursing through her system. Seahawk Rescue, CDC, Commander Jackson's voice replied. Weather update. Conditions deteriorating faster than anticipated. Window now estimated at 23 minutes. Captain requests final confirmation of go, no go. Maya glanced at her. Co-pilot, Lieutenant Rivera. a young officer with exceptional skills but limited experience in extreme weather operations. "Your call, Lieutenant. This isn't a career maker." Rivera's face was serious behind his visor, but his eyes were clear. "I didn't join to stay safe, ma'am. Let's go get our sailor." Maya nodded, feeling a surge of respect for the younger officer. "CDC, Seahawk Rescue. We are go for launch." "Repeat, go for launch." "Understood, Seahawk Rescue." "You are cleared for immediate takeoff. Good hunting." The flight director's signals were barely visible through the rain and spray, but Maya followed them precisely, easing the helicopter off the deck and into the howling gale. The aircraft immediately tried to weather vane into the wind, but she countered with practice control inputs, fighting the elements with the same calm precision she brought to everything. Once clear of the carrier, she dropped to 100 feet above the churning ocean, using the radar altimeter to maintain a precise height above the waves. At this altitude, the wind was slightly less chaotic, though still dangerous. The helicopter bucked and shuddered in the turbulence, but Maya's hands remained steady on the controls, making continuous small adjustments to keep them level and on course. "Roosevelt reports deck ready for arrival," Rivera called over. "Intercom. Patient condition deteriorating. Temperature 104, pulse 130. Maya nodded, focused entirely on flying. The destroyer was 12 nautical miles from their position, a distance that would take about 10 minutes to cover in these conditions. That would leave them just 13 minutes to execute the extraction and return to the carrier before the next storm band hit, assuming the forecasts were accurate. Through the rain-streaked windscreen, visibility was down to less than a mile. Maya flew primarily on instruments, her eyes flicking between the radar display showing the Roosevelt's position, the weather radar tracking the storm bands, and the flight instruments keeping them safely above the mountainous seas below. 5 miles out, Rivera reported. Roosevelt is pitching heavily. Deck angle varying between +10 and -5 degrees. Understood, Maya replied, already calculating approach angles and timing. Landing on a destroyer in calm seas was challenging. Doing it in these conditions would require perfect timing and absolute precision. The Roosevelt appeared out of the rain and spray like a ghost ship, its gray hull barely distinguishable from the angry sea surrounding it. The destroyer was fighting the storm with everything it had, but the smaller vessel was taking a beating. Its bow would rise dramatically on each approaching wave, then plunge into the trough beyond, sending spray higher than its superstructure. Maya circled once, studying the motion pattern, looking for the rhythm in the chaos. There was a pattern there, a cycle to the ship's movement that could be predicted if you knew what to look for. 3 large waves followed by a brief lull, then repeat. The lull was her window. "On my mark, we go in fast. Touch down for exactly 45 seconds, then lift," she told the crew. "Rescue swimmer, you'll have 30 seconds to secure the patient." "Not a second more." "Copy that," came the terse reply from the back. Maya watched, counting the waves. One massive crest hit the destroyer, then another, then a third. As the ship began to stabilize briefly in the following trough, she made her move. "Mark!" The Seahawk dove toward the heaving deck, Maya's hands dancing over the controls with micrometer precision. The helicopter seemed to hang motionless above the landing pad for an impossible moment as she matched the destroyer's movement exactly, then settled onto the deck with a gentle bump despite the chaos around them. "Go, go, go," she called, and the rescue swimmer was out the door before the skids fully settled, sprinting across the pitching deck toward the medical team already emerging with the patient on a stretcher. Maya kept the rotors turning, ready to lift at an instant's notice if the ship's motion became too extreme. Her eyes never left the horizon, calculating the approach of the next wave set, feeling the seconds ticking away in her bones. The rescue swimmer and the ship's medical team fought their way back across the deck, the stretcher between them, the unconscious sailor secured with multiple straps. As they reached the helicopter, Maya felt the destroyer beginning to rise on. The next wave. 30 seconds, she called. Secure now. With practiced efficiency, they loaded the stretcher into the helicopter and secured it to the deck mounts. The rescue swimmer vaulted in behind it. Patient secure. Clear to lift. The crew chief confirmed. Maya didn't wait for the textbook confirmation from the flight deck officer. The destroyer was already beginning to pitch upward as the next wave hit. She pulled power, lifting the Seahawk clear of the deck just as a wall of water crashed over the bow, sending spray across the exact spot where they'd been sitting seconds before. CDC, Seahawk Rescue, she reported as they climbed away from the destroyer. Patient secured, returning to base. ETA 11 minutes. Copy, Seahawk Rescue, Jackson's voice replied, tension evident even through the static. The advised storm band. Advancing faster than predicted. New estimated window closure in 9 minutes. Maya processed this without visible reaction, though inside her mind was racing through calculations and options. Understood, CDC, increasing speed. She pushed the helicopter harder, skimming just 80 feet above the waves now, using every bit of power the engines could safely deliver. The Seahawk responded like a living thing, as if sensing the urgency of their mission. The rescue swimmer had started IVs and was monitoring the patient, his face grim beneath his helmet. BP dropping. We need to get into surgery ASAP. Maya nodded without taking her eyes off the instruments. They were making good time, but the storm wasn't waiting for them. On the weather radar, she could see the next band of intense precipitation moving in faster than predicted. A solid wall of wind and water that would make flight impossible. 5 minutes out, Rivera reported. Carrier visual on radar. The rain intensified suddenly, reducing visibility to near zero. Maya flew entirely on instruments now, trusting the technology and her own instincts to guide them home. The helicopter shuddered as stronger gusts began to hit them, the leading edge of the approaching storm band. CDC, Seahawk Rescue, she called. Request immediate recovery. Conditions deteriorating rapidly. Seahawk Rescue, CDC. Carrier turning into wind. Deck being cleared now. Be advised, wave height now 30 feet. Deck motion severe. Maya knew what that meant. Landing on the carrier would be even more challenging than taking off had been. The massive ship was more stable than the destroyer, but 30-foot seas would still cause significant pitch and roll. Combined with near-zero visibility and increasing winds, they were looking at conditions that would be classified as unsurvivable in any training scenario. 2 minutes out, Rivera called, his voice tight but controlled. I have the carrier on radar. 150 degrees, 3 nautical miles. Maya made a slight course correction, feeling rather than seeing the massive shape of the carrier emerging from the storm ahead of them. The rain was coming down so hard now it sounded like gravel hitting the windscreen. Conditions were deteriorating by the second. Visual contact, she reported as the carrier's superstructure appeared as a darker shadow in the gray wall of rain. Beginning approach. The next minutes were a masterclass in helicopter control. Maya seemed to become one with the aircraft, anticipating every gust, compensating for every shift in the wind, all while gauging the violent movement of the carrier below them. Where most pilots would have been overwhelmed by the sensory input, she processed it all with a calm that bordered on supernatural. The Seahawk hovered above the flight deck, matching the carrier's motion as Maya waited for the right moment. The ship rose on a massive wave, its bow pointing skyward at an angle that would have made landing suicidal. Then it crested and began to level momentarily before the next wave. Now, Maya said, more to herself than the crew. The helicopter descended with precision that defied the chaos around it, touching down exactly in the center of the designated landing area. Deck crews rushed forward, securing the aircraft with chains even as the medical team approached for the patient transfer. "Well done," Rivera breathed, the relief in his voice palpable. Maya didn't respond, her focus absolute until the patient was safely transferred and the helicopter secured. Only then did she power down the systems and remove her helmet, her movements as economical as ever, despite what they'd just accomplished. As they exited the aircraft, the full force of the storm hit them. The wind was now gusting to 60 knots, and staying upright required leaning into it at a sharp angle. The flight deck crew had secured the helicopter with multiple chains, preparing it to weather the worst of the typhoon that was now almost upon them. Inside the relative calm of the island structure, Captain Reeves was waiting. Her face gave away nothing, but her eyes held something. That might have been respect. "Time from wheels up to wheels down. 22 minutes, she said. "Patient already in surgery. Prognosis good." Maya nodded once, her face showing neither pride nor relief. "The aircraft will need a complete inspection. Once the storm passes." "We encountered severe turbulence on the return leg." Reeves almost smiled at the professional understatement. "I think we can arrange that, Commander." As they walked back toward the Combat Direction Center, the captain added quietly, "That was exceptional flying, Maya. Beyond exceptional." "It was necessary flying," Maya replied simply. "The sailor needed evacuation. We had the capability to provide it." Most pilots would have considered it impossible. Most pilots haven't seen what happens when you don't try the impossible when lives are at stake. The words hung between them, heavy with the weight of shared understanding. Both women knew she wasn't just talking about today's mission. She was talking about the valiant, about the choices made and not made, about the burden of living with consequences. In the Combat Direction Center, all eyes turned to them as they entered. The same officers who had dismissed Maya hours earlier now looked at her with expressions ranging from disbelief to respect. The female petty officer was openly smiling, a data tablet clutched forgotten in her hands. Commander Jackson approached, his earlier skepticism replaced by professional acknowledgement. "Impressive flying, Commander. I've never seen anyone handle a Seahawk in those conditions." "Thank you, sir," Maya replied, her tone neutral. This wasn't about personal vindication for her. It never had been. As the carrier battened down for the worst of the typhoon, Maya took her position at the air operations console, already focused on the next challenges. The storm would test the carrier group's endurance over the next 12 hours, bringing conditions that would push crew and equipment to their limits. There would be more decisions to make, more risks to assess, more potential disasters to avert before they materialized. But something had changed in the Combat Direction Center. The dismissive glances were gone. The whispers had stopped. In their place was something far more valuable: respect. Not the kind that came with rank or reputation, but the kind that was earned through actions when everything was on the line. Maya Chen, the officer labeled unfit for duty, had taken command when everyone else froze. And in doing so, she hadn't just saved a sailor's life. She'd reminded everyone in that room what real leadership looked like. Inside the main briefing room, the afternoon staff meeting was getting its second wind after the initial round of status reports. The ventilation system hummed overhead, fighting the humidity that permeated every corner of the carrier despite the engineering crew's best efforts. Folding chairs were arranged in precise rows facing the digital screen covered in ship positions. Weather updates and status reports that painted a clear picture of a carrier group that had survived the worst of the typhoon but wasn't out of danger yet. The same two officers who had turned Maya away that morning were sitting quietly in the back row, their earlier bravado completely absent. "I'm telling you, I've never seen anything like it," the ship's chief medical officer was saying, gesturing with his hands to emphasize his point. The sailor from the Roosevelt would have died without question if he'd waited another hour. Appendix had already ruptured. Massive infection. But she got him here through conditions that should have grounded every aircraft in the fleet. The gathered officers nodded, many of them still processing what they'd witnessed. The rescue flight had already become the stuff of legend, growing more impressive with each retelling. The kind of story that would be shared in officer clubs and training facilities for years to come. "Did you see the flight data?" asked the ship's maintenance officer, her voice carrying the professional appreciation of someone who understood exactly how impossible the feat had been. Wind shear that should have torn the rotors off, visibility under 50 meters. Sea state, exceeding safety parameters by almost double. She flew through conditions that our simulators can't even model properly. "Yeah, well, that's not the most impressive part," said a junior officer who'd been on duty in the CDC during the mission. When she got back, first thing she did was log a complete maintenance checklist for the helicopter. Detailed every stress point that needed inspection, every system that needed verification. In the middle of a typhoon, after flying a mission that should have been impossible, she was thinking about the next pilot who would fly that aircraft. The room fell silent as Captain Reeves entered, followed by Maya and Commander Jackson. The air boss looked like he'd aged 5 years in the last 12 hours. Dark circles under his eyes and a gauntness to his face that spoke of too much caffeine and too little rest. Maya, by contrast, looked exactly the same as she had that morning. Composed, focused, ready for whatever came next. "As you were, Reeves," said as the officers started to rise. "This isn't a formal briefing, just an update on our current situation." She nodded to Jackson, who stepped forward to address the room. The typhoon's eye passed approximately 30 nautical miles south of our position at 0230 this morning. We're currently operating in the weakening quadrant, with wind speeds down to 35 knots and sea state moderating to 15 feet. All vessels in the carrier group report operational status green, with only minor damage reported. He paused, glancing at Maya before continuing. "The Roosevelt reports their medical patient is stable following surgery and will make a full recovery. They've also reported that the decision to evacuate almost certainly saved the sailor's life, as septic shock would have been inevitable without immediate surgical intervention." A murmur of approval ran through the room. Lives saved weren't counted in naval commendations as often as targets destroyed or missions completed. But for the men and women who served, they were the victories that mattered most. "Our current position puts us approximately 180 nautical miles southeast of Okinawa," Jackson continued. "Weather forecasts indicate improving conditions over the Kungu next 24 hours, with flight operations possible by 1800 today if the trend continues. Commander Chen has prepared a recovery plan for our diverted aircraft." He nodded to Maya, who stepped forward without fanfare. The room fell completely silent, every eye fixed on the officer who had proven herself beyond any doubt during the height of the storm. "The current plan calls for staggered recovery of our diverted aircraft beginning at 1900 hours, assuming wind conditions stabilize as forecast," Maya began, her voice clear and confident. "We'll bring them in groups of 3, with priority given to aircraft approaching maintenance deadlines or reporting minor issues." She pulled up a detailed recovery schedule on the main display, showing aircraft call signs, estimated fuel states, and precise timing windows. "Based on sea state projections, we'll establish approach patterns that minimize crosswind component during final approach. Interval spacing will be standard plus 15 seconds to allow for residual deck motion. Recovery operations should be complete by 2230 hours, returning us to full air wing capability." The briefing continued with the kind of precise, detailed planning that characterized naval operations at their best. Nothing was left to chance, no contingency unaddressed. Throughout it all, Maya displayed the same calm competence she'd shown during the rescue mission, but now her expertise was being received very differently. Where before she'd been an outsider to be dismissed, now she was a proven expert whose judgment carried the weight of demonstrated excellence. As the briefing concluded, the officers filed out to their various stations. Maya remained behind, making small adjustments to the recovery plan based on the latest weather data. She was so focused she didn't notice Baseball Cap approaching until he was standing directly in front of her. "Commander Chen," he said, his earlier arrogance completely absent. "Lieutenant Parker. I was on duty this morning when you reported." "Aboard." Maya looked up, her expression neutral. "I remember, Lieutenant." Parker shifted uncomfortably, clearly struggling to find the right words. "I wanted to say, that is, I should have." "You were doing your job as you understood it," Maya said simply, neither accepting nor dismissing his unspoken apology. "No, ma'am." "I was being an ass," Parker admitted with surprising candor. "I made assumptions based on nothing but my own prejudices, and I was completely wrong." Maya studied him for a moment, seeing something in his face that went beyond embarrassment or career concerns. There was genuine regret there, and perhaps the beginning of something more important: growth. "We all make mistakes, Lieutenant," she said finally. "The question is whether we learn from them." "I have, ma'am, believe me." "Then prove it with your actions going forward. Not just toward me, but toward anyone whose capabilities you might be tempted to dismiss based on incomplete information." Parker nodded, accepting the gentle rebuke as the valuable lesson it was. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." As he turned to leave, Maya added, "Lieutenant Parker?" He turned back. "Yes, ma'am." "Your assessment of weather patterns during the morning briefing was actually quite good. You saw the intensification trend before the official forecast updated. Trust those instincts." Parker blinked in surprise, then nodded again, a small smile of genuine gratitude touching his lips before he departed. Captain Reeves had observed the exchange from near the hatch. As Parker left, she approached Maya with a thoughtful expression. "You could have let him stew in his embarrassment," she observed. "Most officers would have." Maya shrugged slightly. "What purpose would that serve? He made a mistake. He recognized it. He'll either learn from it or he won't." And the compliment at the end wasn't a compliment, just an observation. "He does have good instincts about weather patterns. That's valuable in an air operations officer." Reeves smiled slightly. "You're not what I expected, Commander Chen." "People rarely are, Captain, when we take the time to actually see them." The simple truth of that statement hung between them for a moment. Then Reeves gestured toward the hatch. "Walk with me." They moved through the carrier's passageways, navigating the organized complexity of a warship at sea. Sailors snapped to attention as they passed, then resumed their duties with the efficiency that kept the massive vessel functioning as a single organism despite being crewed by thousands of individual humans. "I've been reviewing your service record," Reeves said as they climbed a ladder to the navigation deck. "The unredacted version." Maya said nothing, her face betraying no reaction to this information. "It makes for interesting reading," the captain continued, "especially the parts about the Valiant incident." They reached the navigation deck, where floor-to-ceiling windows provided a panoramic view of the carrier's bow slicing through gradually calming seas. The horizon was still obscured by lingering storm clouds, but patches of blue were beginning to appear overhead. The worst had passed. "You tried to stop flight operations 3 times that night," Reeves said, looking out at the ocean rather than at Maya. "Your logs show you identified the dangerous combination of factors 2 hours before the first accident." "Many people saw pieces of the problem," Maya replied, her voice neutral. "I just happened to see how they connected." "And when your concerns were dismissed, you went outside the chain of command." "I did. Directly to the captain." "Yes." "Who also dismissed you. He had incomplete information." Reeves turned to look at her directly. "That's very generous of you, considering what happened next." Maya met her gaze steadily. It's not about generosity, Captain. It's about accuracy. The command structure on the Valiant had developed blind spots. Information wasn't flowing properly. Warning signs were being misinterpreted or ignored. It was a systemic failure, not an individual one. And yet you were the only one held accountable. A flash of something, not quite pain, but perhaps its echo, crossed Maya's face before her professional mask returned. Someone had to be, she said simply. The Navy needed a clear narrative. A scapegoat, you mean? Maya didn't respond directly to that. Instead, she looked out at the horizon where the storm clouds were slowly breaking apart. 7 people died that night, Captain. 3 aircraft lost. Careers ended. Families shattered. If my reputation had to be sacrificed to ensure the real lessons were learned, that's a price I'd pay again without hesitation. Reeves studied her with new understanding. He never fought the review board's findings, never appealed, never gave interviews or sought vindication, even when later investigations proved you were right. What would that have accomplished? Maya asked. The dead would still be dead. The lessons had already been incorporated into new procedures. My personal redemption wasn't important compared to making sure it never happened again. The captain shook her head slowly, a mixture of admiration and disbelief in her expression. Most officers would have fought tooth and nail to clear their name, would have demanded recognition when they were proven right. Most officers haven't held someone while they died because a warning wasn't heeded. Maya said quietly, and for the first time, Reeves caught a glimpse of the weight she carried. Not just professional disgrace, but personal loss that went bone deep. The co-pilot, Reeves realized. On the 3rd aircraft, he was more than just a colleague. Maya's silence was confirmation enough. I'm sorry, the captain said, meaning it. Maya nodded once, accepting the sentiment without dwelling on it. His daughter starts at Annapolis next month. She's going to be an outstanding officer. Does she know about you? About what really happened? No, and she doesn't need to. Her father was a hero who died serving his country. That's all that matters. Reeves considered this for a long moment. You know, Commander, most people define themselves by what they achieve. Medals earned, ranks attained, recognition received. She paused, looking out at the ocean where the carrier's wake stretched behind them like a road leading back to the storm they'd survived. But the true measure of a naval officer isn't what they achieve. It's what they prevent. Disasters averted, lives not lost. Tragedies that never happen because someone had the courage to speak up, the skill to act, and the wisdom to put the mission above themselves. Maya didn't respond, but something in her posture suggested the words had landed somewhere important. The Navy did you a grave injustice, Commander Chen, Reeves continued. And yet here you are, still serving, still saving lives, still putting others before yourself. That kind of integrity can't be taught in any academy or officer training program. It comes from somewhere deeper. Thank you, Captain, Maya said simply, but I'm just doing my job. No, Commander. You're redefining what the job means. And in doing so, you're setting an example that every officer on this carrier would do well to follow. Before Maya could respond, a young petty officer approached and saluted crisply. Captain, Commander. Weather update from Fleet Meteorology. Conditions improving faster than forecast. Flight operations possible within the hour. Reeves nodded. Thank you, Petty Officer. Inform Commander Jackson to begin preparations. As the sailor departed, Reeves turned back to Maya. Looks like your recovery plan is going to be implemented ahead of schedule. Are you ready? For the first time since coming aboard, Maya smiled slightly. Always, Captain. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of focused activity as the carrier recovered its scattered air wing. Aircraft that had diverted to Okinawa or other safe harbors during the typhoon were now returning home, their pilots navigating the still challenging conditions with the skill that defined naval aviators at their best. Maya coordinated the entire operation from the Combat Direction Center, her calm voice guiding each pilot through their approach and landing sequence. Every detail had been anticipated, every contingency planned for. Under her direction, aircraft that would normally have been recovered in 3 hours were safely aboard in just over 4, slower than standard operations, but remarkably efficient given the residual sea state and wind conditions. As the final aircraft touched down and was directed to its parking position, a spontaneous round of applause broke out in the CDC. Not the polite acknowledgement of a job adequately done, but the genuine appreciation of professionals who had just witnessed excellence in its purest form. Maya accepted it with a small nod, then immediately turned her attention to post-recovery operations. There were maintenance schedules to adjust, crew rest periods to manage, and preparations for the next day's operations to complete. The work never really ended on a carrier at sea. Later that evening, as the ship settled into its night routine, Maya found herself on the observation deck, looking out at a sky that had finally cleared enough to reveal stars. The wind had died down to a gentle breeze, and the carrier's motion through the water had steadied to the rhythmic pulse that experienced sailors found more comforting than still land. The female petty officer from earlier, petty officer first. Class Ramirez, Maya had learned, approached with 2 cups of coffee in her hands. She offered one to Maya with a slightly nervous smile. "Thought you might need this, ma'am. It's been a long day." Maya accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "It has, but a good one." Ramirez hesitated, clearly wanting to say more but unsure if it was her place. Maya gestured to the spot beside her, an invitation to speak freely. "Something on your mind, petty officer?" "Permission to speak candidly, ma'am." "Always." Ramirez looked out at the ocean for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "What you did today, the rescue flight, the recovery operation, it wasn't just impressive. It was inspiring." Maya sipped her coffee, waiting for the young sailor to continue. "I've been in the Navy for 4 years now," Ramirez went on, "and I've met a lot of officers. Good ones, bad ones, mediocre ones. But I've never met anyone who faced the kind of pushback you got this morning and responded the way you did. How would that be?" Maya asked, genuinely curious about the younger woman's perspective. "Without anger, without resentment, you just kept doing your job, kept focusing on what needed to be done, not on how you were being treated." Ramirez turned to look at her directly. "Everyone knows about the Valiant now, about what really happened, about how you were treated afterward, but you came back anyway. You put all that aside to serve, to save lives." Maya was quiet for a long moment, considering her response. "The Navy isn't perfect, Petty Officer Ramirez. No institution is. It's made up of humans, and humans make mistakes. Sometimes those mistakes have serious consequences." She looked out at the stars, her expression thoughtful. "But the mission remains. People still need to be protected. Lives still need to be saved. The work is bigger than any individual's career or reputation. Is that why you came back? For the mission?" Maya's eyes found a particular star, bright and steady on the horizon. "I came back because someone once told me that true service isn't about what you get from it. It's about what you give to it." And I still had something to give. Ramirez nodded slowly, absorbing this. "I'm applying to officer candidate school next year," she said after a moment. "I wasn't sure before. Wasn't sure I had what it takes. But after today—" "You'll make an excellent officer," Maya said with quiet conviction. "You see people, not just ranks or reputations. That's rarer than you might think." "Thank you, ma'am." Ramirez straightened slightly, pride evident in her bearing. "I should get back to my station. Carry on, petty officer." As Ramirez walked away, Maya remained at the railing, contemplating the vastness of the ocean and sky around them. The coffee was good, strong and hot, the way she preferred it. Like the young petty officer who had brought it, there was substance there that went beyond the surface. She hadn't expected to find a sense of belonging on the horizon, hadn't expected to be accepted, much less respected. She'd come to fulfill a promise, to prove to herself that she could still function at the highest level of her profession, despite everything that had happened. But somehow, in the space of a single day, she'd found something she thought she'd lost forever: purpose. The hatch opened behind her, and Captain Reeves emerged onto the observation deck. She joined Maya at the railing without speaking, content to share the moment of quiet contemplation beneath the stars. "Beautiful night," she said finally. "Hard to believe we were in the middle of a typhoon just hours ago." "Nature's contrasts," Maya agreed. "Reminds us not to become too comfortable with any single state of affairs." Reeves smiled slightly at the philosophical observation. "I've been speaking with Comcar Grupper. The Admiral was quite impressed with your performance today." Maya nodded, accepting the information without visible reaction. "The entire crew performed admirably under difficult conditions." "True, but you were singled out for particular mention, as was your recovery plan, which is being distributed to other carrier groups as a best practice example." "I'm glad it proved useful." Reeves turned to face her directly. "The Admiral also asked an interesting question, one I didn't have an immediate answer for." "Oh?" "He asked why an officer of your caliber was still a lieutenant commander after 15 years of service. Why you hadn't been promoted to full commander despite having qualifications and experience that should have put you on the fast track to captain by now." Maya's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Not hope exactly, but perhaps its shadow. "I imagine the answer to that question is in my service record," she said carefully. "Parts of it, yes, but not the full picture." Reeves reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object, which she placed on the railing between them. "This arrived via priority message drone while you were coordinating the recovery operations." Maya looked down at the object, a commander's oak leaf insignia, gleaming dully in the starlight. "I don't understand," she said, genuine confusion in her voice. "Neither did I, at first," Reeves admitted. "But it seems the Admiral has been reviewing certain personnel decisions made in the aftermath of the Valiant incident. Your promotion to commander was actually approved 3 years ago, but somehow the paperwork was misfiled." The careful choice of words made it clear this was no administrative error. Someone had deliberately buried Maya's promotion as one final act of retribution for her role in exposing systemic failures that powerful people preferred to blame on individual error. "The Admiral has personally fast-tracked the correction of this oversight," Reeves continued. "Effective immediately, you are Commander Maya Chen, with all the responsibilities and privileges thereof. Your back pay and benefits will be adjusted accordingly." Maya stared at the insignia, her composure finally cracking to reveal genuine shock. "I never expected. That is, I had accepted that my career would remain limited by politics and grudges." Reeves finished for her. "Perhaps that would have been the case in the old Navy, but things are changing, Commander. Excellence can only be denied for so long before it demands recognition." She picked up the insignia and held it out. "You've more than earned this. Not just today, but every day you continued to serve, despite how you were treated. Every day you put the mission above yourself." Maya accepted the oak leaf with a hand that might have trembled slightly. "Thank you, Captain. Don't thank me. This isn't a gift or a favor. It's the correction of an injustice that should never have occurred." Reeves's voice carried the conviction of someone who believed deeply in the institution they served, even while acknowledging its flaws. "The Navy is better with you in it, Commander Chen. Better with your voice, your expertise, and your unwavering commitment to doing what's right regardless of personal cost." She extended her hand, and Maya shook it firmly. The formal promotion ceremony will be tomorrow at 0900, Reeves said. The entire Air Wing has requested to attend. I believe they want to show their appreciation for the officer who brought them all home safely through a typhoon. As the captain turned to leave, she paused at the hatch. Oh, and one more thing, Commander. The Admiral mentioned that the Naval Academy at Annapolis has an opening for a visiting instructor in advanced aviation operations next semester. Someone with real-world experience handling crisis situations. He thought you might be interested. Maya's eyes widened slightly as the implications registered. That would coincide with the plebe summer for this year's incoming class, Reeves confirmed with a knowing smile. Including a certain midshipman whose father would be very proud of her, and of you. After the captain departed, Maya remained on the observation deck, the commander's oak leaf held carefully in her palm. She hadn't come to the Horizon seeking redemption or recognition. She'd come to honor a promise made to someone who could no longer keep it himself. But somehow, in doing so, she'd found something she never expected, a future. The stars continued. Their eternal wheel overhead, and beneath them, Commander Maya Chen, no longer labeled unfit for duty, contemplated the infinite possibilities that lay ahead. Not just for herself, but for all those she would lead, teach, and inspire in the years to come. The Navy had given her a second chance. But more importantly, she had given herself permission to take it. The formal promotion ceremony took place. On the flight deck of the USS Horizon, beneath a sky that had transformed from typhoon fury to perfect blue. The entire air wing stood in precise formation, dress uniforms gleaming in the morning sun, faces solemn with the recognition that they were witnessing something more significant than a routine advancement in rank. Captain Reeves stood center. Stage, her own dress uniform adorned with the ribbons and medals that told the story of a distinguished career. Beside her, Maya Chen stood at attention, her posture reflecting the same quiet dignity she brought to everything she did. "Attention to orders," Reeves began, her voice carrying across the assembled crew without need of amplification. "The President of the United States, acting upon the recommendation of the Secretary of the Navy, has placed special trust and confidence in the patriotism, integrity, and abilities of Lieutenant Commander Maya Chen." The traditional words echoed across the flight deck, carrying with them the weight of naval tradition that stretched back centuries. In view of these special qualities and her demonstrated potential to serve in greater capacity, Lieutenant Commander Chen is hereby promoted to the rank of Commander, United States Navy, effective immediately. As Reeves pinned the commander's oak leaf to Maya's collar, replacing the lieutenant commander's insignia she had worn for far too long, a spontaneous cheer erupted from the assembled crew. It wasn't the polite applause of a ceremonial occasion, but the genuine appreciation of a ship's company that had witnessed excellence in its purest form. Maya's face remained composed, but something in her eyes had changed. Not pride exactly, but perhaps acceptance of her place, her purpose, and her path forward. The ceremony concluded with the traditional salute, and as the crew dispersed to their duties, many took a moment to congratulate their new commander. The same officers who had dismissed her just days earlier now approached with genuine respect. The pilots whose lives she had guided safely home through the typhoon's aftermath shook her hand with the gratitude of professionals who recognized how close they had come to disaster. But it was Petty Officer Ramirez who perhaps summed it up best as she passed by with a crisp salute. "Sometimes the right person just needs to be in the right place at the right time, ma'am," she said quietly. "The rest of us are just lucky when that happens." 6 months later, the hallowed halls of the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis echoed with the controlled chaos of a new academic year. First-year midshipmen, plebes in academy parlance, hurried between classes with the particular combination of urgency and precision that characterized military education. Their faces showed the strain of adjusting to the Academy's demanding regimen, but also the determination that had earned them a place among America's future naval officers. In a modern classroom overlooking Chesapeake Bay, Commander Maya Chen stood before a group of advanced aviation students, her uniform now bearing the insignia of an Academy instructor along with her commander's oak leaf. On the screen behind her, a complex simulation showed multiple aircraft operating from a carrier in deteriorating weather conditions. "The critical error here isn't technical," she was saying, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had lived the scenarios she now taught. "It's perceptual. The pilots and controllers are each seeing pieces of the situation correctly, but no one is integrating those pieces into a coherent whole." She paused the simulation at a crucial moment, when 3 separate warning indicators had activated simultaneously. This is where experience differs from training. In training, you're taught to respond to each indicator according to procedure. In real operations, you need to recognize when multiple indicators are telling you part of a larger story. A midshipman in the front row raised his hand. "Commander, how do you develop that kind of integrated awareness? Is it just a matter of flight hours?" Maya considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Flight hours help, certainly. But more important is intentional awareness, actively looking for connections between seemingly unrelated factors. Weather patterns, mechanical indicators, crew fatigue, operational tempo. These elements don't exist in isolation. They interact in ways that can compound risk or create safety margins, depending on how you manage them. Another hand went up, this one belonging to a young woman in the 3rd row. Maya had noticed her before, sharp, focused, with questions that revealed a mind that naturally sought connections. She also had eyes that sometimes struck Maya with painful familiarity. "Commander, in the Valiant case study we reviewed last week, the accident report indicated that warning signs were present for hours before the incident. Why weren't they acted upon? Was it a failure of awareness or something else?" The classroom fell silent. The Valiant incident had become required study at the Academy, a case example of how systemic failures could cascade into disaster despite the presence of capable personnel and functioning equipment. But most students were unaware of their instructors' personal connection to those events. Maya met the young woman's gaze steadily, seeing in her the same fearless inquiry that had characterized her father. "An excellent question, Midshipman Taylor," she replied, using the formal address rather than the young woman's first name, maintaining the professional distance she had carefully established. The warning signs were indeed present and were in fact noted by several officers. The failure wasn't in observation, but in integration and communication. She moved to the front of her desk, her posture relaxed but her eyes intense with the importance of what she was conveying. There's a phenomenon in aviation psychology called normalization of deviance, the gradual acceptance of small departures from safety standards until the abnormal becomes the new normal. On the Valiant, operational pressure had slowly eroded. Safety margins. Each small compromise seemed reasonable in isolation, but together they created a situation where disaster became not just possible, but probable. Midshipman Taylor nodded thoughtfully, absorbing the lesson. Her father's daughter in every way, though she had no idea that the woman teaching her had held his hand as he died on a storm-tossed flight deck half a world away. "The most important skill any naval officer can develop," Maya continued, addressing the entire class now, "is the courage to speak up when you see those connections forming. To voice concerns even when they're unwelcome. To stand firm when lives are at stake, regardless of personal consequences." As the class ended and the midshipman filed out, Maya gathered her materials, preparing for her next teaching block. She had found unexpected fulfillment at the Academy, shaping the minds of officers who would one day command the fleet. It wasn't the path she had envisioned for herself, but it was one where her hard-won wisdom could have the greatest impact. "Commander Chen?" Maya looked up to find Midshipman Taylor standing before her desk, academic folder clutched in one hand. "Yes, Midshipman? I wanted to ask." Taylor hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "The officer on the Valiant who tried to stop flight operations, the one who was disciplined afterward, was she right?" Maya kept her expression neutral despite the sudden acceleration of her heart rate. The official review eventually concluded that her assessment of the risk factors was accurate, yes, but they still ended her career. "That's not entirely accurate," Maya replied carefully. "Her career path was certainly affected, but she continued to serve." Taylor's brow furrowed. "Slightly. It just seems wrong. Being punished for being right." "The Navy, like any large institution, sometimes makes mistakes," Maya said, "but it also learns from them. The procedures developed after the Valiant incident have prevented similar disasters. In that sense, what happened had meaning beyond the immediate tragedy." The young woman nodded slowly, but something in her expression suggested she wasn't entirely satisfied with this answer. Maya recognized that look, the determination to dig deeper, to understand the human factors behind institutional decisions. "So much like her father. Is there something else, Midshipman?" Taylor squared her shoulders slightly. "My father died on the Valiant, ma'am." The simple statement hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that the young woman couldn't possibly understand. Maya kept her face composed with an effort that drew on years of disciplined self-control. "I know," she said simply. Taylor's eyes widened slightly. "You do?" "I review the backgrounds of all my students, Midshipman. It helps me understand the perspectives they bring to their studies." It wasn't a lie, precisely. She did review student backgrounds. She just hadn't needed to review Taylor's to know exactly who she was. "He was a lieutenant," Taylor continued. "A helicopter pilot. The official report said he was helping evacuate injured personnel when the accident occurred." "That sounds consistent with what I know of the incident," Maya replied, maintaining her professional demeanor despite the memories crashing through her mind, the storm, the chaos, John Taylor's voice on the radio as he brought his helicopter in to evacuate the wounded, his final words as the deck heaved unexpectedly, and everything went wrong at once. "I'm applying for helicopter training after graduation," Taylor said, a note of determination entering her voice. "I want to fly search and rescue like he did." Maya studied the young woman standing before her, straight-backed, clear-eyed, filled with purpose, John's daughter, the child he had spoken of with such pride during long nights on deployment, showing photos of a gap-toothed little girl who wanted to be just like her dad. Now here she was, on the threshold of the same career, carrying the same dedication to saving rather than taking lives. The continuity of it struck Maya with unexpected force. "Your father would be proud of that choice," she said, allowing a hint of personal warmth to enter her voice. Search and rescue pilots represent the highest ideals of naval aviation. Skill directed toward preserving life rather than threatening it. Taylor's expression brightened. "That's what I think too, ma'am." As the midshipman turned to leave, Maya found herself speaking again. "Midshipman Taylor?" The young woman paused. "Yes, Commander. If you're serious about rescue operations, I'm leading an advanced seminar next semester on extreme weather aviation. It's normally reserved for third years, but I could make an exception for a student with the right motivation." Taylor's face lit up with genuine excitement. "I'd be honored, ma'am. Thank you." After she departed, Maya sat alone in the classroom, looking out at the Chesapeake Bay where afternoon sunlight danced on the water. She had come to Annapolis to fulfill a promise, to watch over John Taylor's daughter from a distance, to ensure she had the guidance and opportunity she deserved. She hadn't intended to become directly involved in the young woman's education, hadn't planned to reveal herself, even obliquely. But seeing her in person, the same determined jaw, the same questioning mind, The same instinct to run toward danger if it meant saving others had awakened something Maya had thought long buried. Not just the pain of loss, but the possibility of legacy, of continuity, of meaning that transcended individual tragedy. Her desk phone buzzed, interrupting her reflections. "Commander Chen," she answered. "Commander, this is Admiral Harrington's office. The Admiral requests your presence at 1600 hours regarding the typhoon response protocols you submitted." "Understood, I'll be there." The typhoon response protocols had been Maya's first major project at the Academy, a comprehensive revision of how carrier groups should prepare for and operate during extreme weather events. She had distilled everything she'd learned from the Valiant disaster and the Horizon rescue into a set of guidelines that emphasized integration of information, clear communication of risk factors, and decisive action when warning signs appeared. She hadn't expected Admiral Harrington, the Academy superintendent, to take personal interest in what was essentially a technical document. But then, nothing about her career had followed expected paths. At precisely 1600 hours, Maya presented herself at the superintendent's office, her uniform immaculate as always. "Commander Chen reporting, as ordered, sir." Admiral Harrington, a compact man with shrewd eyes and a reputation for blunt speech, waved her to a seat. "At ease, Commander. This isn't a formal review." He picked up a document from his desk, her typhoon response protocols, she noted, and tapped it thoughtfully. "I've been reviewing your work, Commander. It's impressive. Comprehensive, practical, and grounded in real-world experience rather than theoretical models." "Thank you, sir." The Chief of Naval Operations agrees. He's directed that your protocols be implemented fleet-wide, effective immediately. Maya absorbed this news with her characteristic composure, though the significance wasn't lost on her. Fleet-wide implementation meant her work would influence naval operations across the globe, potentially saving countless lives in the years to come. "I'm gratified to hear that, Admiral." Harrington studied her with an expression that suggested he was seeing beyond her professional mask. "You know, Chen, when your assignment to Annapolis came through, there were some raised eyebrows. Your history with the Valiant incident made certain parties uncomfortable." Maya said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "I'll admit, I had my own reservations," the Admiral went on. "Not about your qualifications, those were impeccable, but about whether someone who had been through what you experienced could effectively teach within the system that had, frankly, treated you unjustly." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "I was wrong. In just 6 months, you've had more positive impact on our aviation program than instructors who've been here for years. You've brought a perspective that can't be found in textbooks or simulation programs, the human dimension of decision-making under pressure." "Thank you, sir. That's very kind." "It's not kindness, Commander. It's recognition of excellence." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "Which brings me to the real reason I asked you here today." He pushed a folder across the desk toward her. "The Navy is establishing a new Center for Operational Risk Management. Its mission will be to study near misses and actual incidents across all branches of naval operations, identify patterns, and develop training to prevent recurrence. The CNO wants you to head it." Maya didn't reach for the folder immediately, the unexpected nature of the offer leaving her momentarily at a loss for words. "This would be a full captain's position," Harrington continued, clearly enjoying her rare display of surprise. "With direct reporting to the CNO and broad authority to implement changes across training and operational protocols." "I'm honored by the consideration, Admiral, but I've only just begun my work here at the Academy, which has already proven your value to the service in this capacity," Harrington replied. "The center would be based here at Annapolis, allowing you to continue teaching while building something that could transform how we approach risk across the entire fleet." He gestured to the folder, Review the proposal. It represents an opportunity to take what you've learned, both from your successes and from the Valiant, and use it to protect the next generation of sailors and officers. To ensure that other voices of warning are heard before disaster strikes. Maya finally reached for the folder, her mind already considering the possibilities. A center dedicated to learning from mistakes rather than assigning blame. A systematic approach to identifying risk factors before they compounded into tragedy. The chance to transform her personal redemption into institutional improvement. When would this take effect, sir? Next fiscal year. 9 months from now. Enough time to complete your current teaching commitments and develop a transition plan, including the advanced seminar she had just offered to Midshipman Taylor. Maya realized time enough to fulfill her promise to John in a way she hadn't anticipated, by directly shaping his daughter's understanding of the profession that had claimed his life. I'll review the proposal carefully, Admiral. I expect nothing less, Commander. Harrington stood, indicating the meeting was concluding. Oh, and one more thing. Should you accept the position, the Navy would like to formally rescind the letter of reprimand from the Valiant incident. Replace it with a commendation for courage in attempting to prevent the disaster. Maya rose to her feet, her composure momentarily shaken by this unexpected addendum. Sir, that's not necessary. I didn't come back to the Navy seeking vindication. No, you didn't, Harrington agreed. Which is precisely why you deserve it. The best officers I've known weren't the ones who sought recognition, but those who did the right thing regardless of personal consequences. You exemplify that principle, Commander Chen. As Maya left the Admiral's office, the weight of the folder in her hand seemed to represent something beyond a new career opportunity. It was the closing of a circle, the transformation of personal tragedy into institutional wisdom, the chance to ensure that other officers who saw danger approaching would be heard rather than silenced. She walked across the academy grounds, where afternoon drills were underway. Formations of midshipmen moved with the precision that had characterized naval training for generations, their young faces serious with the responsibility they were learning to shoulder. Among them was Midshipman Taylor, her posture perfect, her movements crisp, her future stretching before her with all its promise and peril. Maya watched her for a moment, seeing both the echo of her father and the emergence of her own distinct strength. In 9 months, Maya would likely be Captain Chen, heading a center dedicated to transforming how the Navy understood and managed risk. She would have the authority to implement changes that could save lives across the fleet. She would have, in essence, the institutional voice she had lacked on that fateful night on the Valiant. But perhaps more importantly, she would have the opportunity to help shape officers like Taylor, to instill in them the courage to speak up when they saw danger approaching, to stand firm when lives were at stake, to value truth above comfort and safety above expediency. That, she realized, was the truest fulfillment of her promise to John, not just to watch over his daughter, but to help create a Navy where her voice would be heard if she ever found herself in the position Maya had faced on the Valiant's storm-tossed deck. As the sun began to set over Annapolis, casting long shadows across the parade ground, Maya Chen, no longer labeled unfit for duty, no longer defined by a single tragic night, contemplated the future with a sense of purpose that transcended personal vindication. She had been broken by the system, exiled to professional obscurity, her warnings ignored until disaster proved them right. But she had returned, not bitter but determined, not to seek justice for herself but to create it for others. And in doing so, she had transformed her individual redemption into institutional evolution. The folder in her hands represented more than a new title or increased authority. It represented the Navy's recognition that sometimes the most valuable officers were those who had the courage to speak uncomfortable truths, who put mission and crew above career and comfort, who saw the patterns others missed, who stood firm when protocol and pressure pushed toward compromise. As the midshipmen completed their drill and dispersed toward their evening duties, Maya turned toward her office, her decision already made, though she would review the proposal with her characteristic thoroughness before formalizing it. The center for operational risk management would become her legacy, not just to John Taylor and his daughter, not just to the sailors lost on the Valiant, but to every officer and sailor who would serve in the years to come. A legacy built not on perfect performance, but on the courage to acknowledge imperfection. Not on avoiding failure, but on learning from it. Not on individual heroics, but on systematic improvement. She had been labeled unfit for duty because she saw disaster approaching and refused to remain silent. Now that same quality, that same unflinching commitment to truth over comfort, had become her greatest strength. The quality the Navy now recognized as essential to its future. Sometimes, Maya reflected as she watched the last light fade over Chesapeake Bay. Being broken was the necessary first step to being rebuilt, stronger, wiser, and more capable of preventing others from suffering the same fate. Sometimes, the judgment of unfit was simply a failure of imagination about what fitness truly required. And sometimes, taking command when everyone else froze wasn't about asserting authority. It was about accepting responsibility for the lives in your care, for the truth as you saw it, and for the future you helped create through your choices in the present moment. In the end, that was the lesson she hoped to impart to Midshipman Taylor and all the future officers who would pass through her classroom. Not just how to fly in storms, but how to stand firm in them. Not just how to follow protocols, but when to question them. Not just how to survive, but how to ensure others survived as well. It was, she decided, a worthy legacy. And one John Taylor would have understood completely. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload. From us